All right, Jim. Well, as we begin to wrap up this episode, we'll wrap up after this.
As your attention begins to wane.
It's time for From the Files.
Uh-oh.
This is part 2 of the Dave Meltzer one. It could be a multi-part, but we're going to stop at 2 for at least now. This is a long letter, and I got a long reply.
And by the way, the From the Files segment, for the folks who haven't tuned in recently, Brian is going through the wrestling news files of Norman Kietzer and Jim Melby that he owns and possesses, has the rights to, and Norm Kietzer kept every letter and communication he ever got and a copy of everything he ever sent out, much like the Jack Pfeffer of the wrestling magazine industry. And on a recent program, we went through Dave Meltzer's attempt to sell Melby on the idea that he could do a story on the San Francisco U.S. title and the Japanese wrestling scene that he was well connected with. This was from 1982, I think, right?
And then Norm Keitzer's attempts in the 80s to get issues of the Observer sent to him.
Yes, even when he was trying to pay for them.
Well, this one, we're going to take a step back. September 5th, 1984. So this is before WrestleMania. This is after Cyndi Lauper. A little over a year after Norm Kietzer lost the WWF business. Dave Meltzer's Observer's been going for a little while now. Let's go to this. Dear Mr. Kietzer, I received the most recent issue of your publication, October 1984, today, and had a few problems with it.
Uh-oh.
Which I thought it would be better to contact you personally about than air any of these gripes publicly.
Now, wait a minute. This guy, Dave was writing a year and a half earlier, please plug my newsletter that I'm going to do that I think will be the greatest newsletter ever. And also, can you please let me write some articles for your magazine? And if he didn't complain about the $35 that he got paid for that one article, then what's he got to complain about now?
A few minor points. In the fan club column, you have continued to list the Observer as being monthly, when in fact it comes out every 3 weeks. The subscription price is $13 for 6 issues, with 1 issue for $2. The reason being...
What? Now wait, what? Back up, what?
The subscription price is $13 for 6 issues, with 1 issue for $2.
Well, if I send you $2 a week at the end of 6 weeks, I'm $1 ahead, aren't I?
It sounds like that's exactly what it says.
Well, they're $10 each or 2 for $50.
The reason being that the mid-January issue will be the annual yearbook. The yearbook will be about 50 pages. The yearbook
Well, wait a minute. That again, I don't mean to bog you down here, but that fucking pricing scheme seems to be year-round, and we're not just talking about... Why doesn't he have a set price for issues and then in the add-on a la carte the annual? I'm just spitballing here. I don't know.
The yearbook will be about 50 pages and individually cost $5. I have also asked a number of times recently to mention I am interested in trading either VHS or beta tapes with anyone. Right now,
especially if you have a good-looking girlfriend.
Right now, especially the Mid-South area. Actually, I am now receiving regular tapes from every major circuit except Southwest and Mid-South, thus can offer WWF, AWA, Carolinas, Georgia, Florida, Memphis, World Class, all 3 Japan groups, when the 3rd gets its TV outlet.
Wait a minute. He said he's not getting Mid-South television in 1984?
September 84.
Had he moved from Wichita Falls, Texas? Because he was there in a couple of the towns where we had the last Stampede. He was working at a newspaper. I didn't know him then and had never met him and hadn't even heard of him, but he has since talked about working at a newspaper, I think along with Mark Nolte for a brief period of time.
Yeah, that's right.
And he was watching the Mid-South TV in 1984.
He was going to some of the shows, I believe, in Oklahoma City, I want to say.
Yeah, Oak City is where it was. He was at the last Stampede. Well, anyway,
Well, it says here San
already
Jose.
he's trying to con somebody.
Well, it says San Jose.
He's
as his
back in
address.
San Jose now. They ran him out of Texas.
And Calgary until it disbands, along with Portland in exchange. Actually, the main issue I am writing is because of the nature of your past issue in regards to the real story about what is happening in wrestling.
Uh-oh.
Now, I'm sure my personal feelings about what Vinny is attempting to do to the business.
He's calling him Vinny already?
Once again, now I am sure my personal feelings about what Vinny is attempting to do to the business are pretty close to the same as yours. Since you have more of an economic interest, you probably feel even stronger about it. But being an avid fan, and one who sees the business going into a major slump next year, my thoughts are similar.
Wait. He called for a slump?
In 85.
Well, okay, I didn't know anybody in 84 was calling for a slump. They were calling for trouble, but things were just heating up.
At the same time, I think your issue moved into Bill Apter journalism, with its making up facts in order to get across the point. I realize I take a very strong stance on the current state of wrestling, but never, and that's underlined, have I made up a fact or printed anything that, I guess he originally wrote what, so he crossed that out. That's what screwed me up. Anything that at the time I printed it, I didn't believe it to be the truth. I often
It's wrestling publicity. Norm Keitzer was doing magazines to be sold in the arenas by the promoters and on the newsstands for wrestling fans that wanted to fucking know about their goddamn favorite wrestlers. They didn't want non-kayfabe shit that they didn't understand. Dave has been narrowcasting since the start, hadn't he?
I often make mistakes, and my buddies, and that's in quotes, at Titan Sports continue to swear I'm never right more than 50% of the time. But because of the nature of the business, it's impossible to print anything meaningful without occasionally being in error. I certainly agree it is insulting to fans to tell them that the wrestling they have supported for years is minor league. I also agree WWF has a horrid record for developing new talent, which I believe would be the worst effect if McMahon's pipe dream becomes reality. So let's stop there. That's interesting. 1984, McMahon's pipe dream, which was eating up the entirety of wrestling, which kind of happened, and it killing the pipeline for talent.
Yeah.
Which is exactly what ended up happening, which is why they needed OVW.
And that's... Everybody was assuming that Vince was nuts with what he was trying to do. Well, not nuts, but that he wasn't going to succeed in 1984 in running everybody out of business. But they were incensed that he was not only damaging the business by running opposition to everybody, but by openly making it more entertaining and silly, which did hurt. I don't think that Vince running against some of the promoters, Mid-South, Crockett, Memphis, World Class, the strong territories, I don't think the bigger production or the major league is what swayed people. I think that the very point of Vince's product, that it's kind of over the top and silly and not to be taken seriously, and it's not a blood struggle for revenge, hurt the territories that were booming where everything was a blood struggle for revenge. Because it kind of took it's like, maybe they're not as serious as we thought. You see what I'm saying?
I do.
A lot of the fans felt that way in the Carolinas when I was actively speaking to them and seeing them walking into the fucking building every night. But that's the thing is, I don't think the promoters thought that he was going to succeed until him taking so much of the over talent in so many of the key places hurt the businesses to the point where they were on the verge of, and then it was like, oh shit. And by then everybody's getting smart. Not everybody. Now everybody's smart, but people are being smartened up, and kind of entertainment wrestling was the thing that was bulletproof because you already knew it was bullshit. But the other promotions were harmed by the revelation that it was bullshit.
And again, this is that period of time pre-WrestleMania, just months before Mr. T would get involved, months before David Schultz and John Stossel, and they got a ton of publicity.
Yeah.
There was a perfect storm at the beginning of 1985. And
but how about Dave writing a guy that's been publishing magazines for 20 years and he's like a 23-year-old journalism graduate, and he said, I had a few problems with your recent publication. I'd be like, motherfucker, you were asking me if you could write for me a year ago, and now you got problems with my publication?
Let's go back to Dave. Whether the WWF has more top talent working for it than the NWA, AWA, and Mid-South combined is, of course, opinion, and you are entitled to it. I disagree, however. When it comes to meaningful talent, which really counts, the few with real box office appeal, the WWF has a distinct majority with only a few real draws: Kevin and Kerry Von Erich, Ric Flair, Jerry Lawler, the Road Warriors, and a very few others left. Let me turn the page here. Your first knock against Titan is they have bought...
So now he's holding up for him.
Is that they have bought TV time out from existing AWA or NWA promotions. While I'd rather the business didn't operate this way, I have grown accustomed to the business practices in wrestling, which are like an old-style Texas death match. Anything goes until one man is left standing. The fact is, tracing history, the TV time slot the WWF bought from the AWA here in San Francisco, which is really the only direct theft, shall we say, KPLR TV in St. Louis.
Yeah, KPLR is
was
the St. Louis station.
Was going to drop Geigel whether Vince had come to town or not, was originally an AWA theft from ICW.
He was probably going to pick up Matisic, though.
They would have picked up Matisic, and then Vince came in and they forced Vince to work with Matisic, and then Vince pushed out Larry Matisic. But again, to end this sentence, and there was a lot in between, he's saying that Vince, the TV Vince is being, that they're saying Vince stole, the AWA stole from ICW, when the Poffos somehow got TV in San Francisco, if you remember that.
Oh, good Lord, that's right. That's when they started saying on TV in Lexington they were having big matches at the Cow Palace.
In fact, for all the multitudes of complaints from the AWA when WWF first came to this area, the AWA came in when an existing NWA group, Roy Shires, was still operating regularly. If you look at crowd figures from this area, it is obvious the wrestling public is quite happy with the change, at least at the present. I realize your publication will never print anything negative about the AWA, but when you realize the AWA only averages 800 fans monthly and WWF has topped 10,000 3 straight times, you can see which side the fans have chosen. So I'm guessing Norm Keitzer wrote an editorial saying they're not doing good everywhere, and Dave's taking up for the San Francisco part of it?
I believe so, because Norm lived in Minnesota. He had known that's how he had got started, was doing AWA publications and Vernon, etc. So with Vern running but at that point in time, when Vern made money in San Francisco and going out to Northern California, Shire was really only running the Cow Palace. His territory had fallen apart, and he had stopped even producing his own television and was using another tape and bringing in talent. And that's what Vern invaded and, took over and did well for a while in California. And then Vince came in and snatched, the whole roster.
I always say, what side is Leo Nomalini on? And that's where I go.
There you go. You can't go wrong with Nomalini.
The next knock is Titan's ticket prices. I lived in Texas and know that for a big show in Dallas, the best seats go for $30. I don't know anywhere McMahon charges more than
$30, by the way. That would have to be front row at Texas Stadium. Because you could still get front row at the Sportatorium in Dallas in 1984 for like fucking $10.
Well, yeah, the next sentence says McMahon charges no more than $12 for any tickets. $30 for 1984. It doesn't seem like a lot now. That's an extraordinary amount for ringside for a weekly territory or anything.
I don't even think that was front row at Reunion Arena for a Christmas or Thanksgiving Star Wars. He had to be talking about Texas Stadium.
We'll see what we can find out about that. The Mid-South shows in Oklahoma City charge $12 for ringside for a normal show and $15 for a special show. Special,
yeah,
in quotes. The special meaning...
Whenever the Midnight Express was in a main event, they got 15, baby.
Special meaning any card after a previous sellout at $12. You know what? That's true.
Yeah.
The AWA here was charging $12 until crowds got so bad, they got so desperate and chopped $2 off. In most competing cities in the AWA region, the prices between both groups are comparable. WWF charges $3 more in Miami.
Why is he telling Norman Keitzer this, who couldn't give two French fried titty fucks about it to begin with?
WWF charges $3 more in Miami than the NWA group and charged $1 more in what had been Lawler's region, but your blanket statement is false. In fact, it was Bill Watts, not McMahon, who had the nerve to charge $50 for the recent Superdome show. Was that ringside at the Superdome? $50?
Well, okay, that $50, then that would have been the front row at the Superdome. That's not ringside. That would just be the front row. Second row would probably be $25 or whatever.
It was in Florida on NWA soil that they had the nerve to charge $100 for the Orange Bowl show. Holy shit, really?
I didn't know that. No wonder they didn't do a fucking major house there in addition to the fucking inclement weather.
No wonder Dusty said, hey, Eddie, I'm leaving unless you give me the fucking money I drew on this fucking show.
Well, and you know what? When they gave Dutch Mantell the book in Florida and he got things going kind of good, they had a sellout in one of the medium-sized towns, and they told him in the office, they said, oh, well, that's almost the best we've ever done. Well, fuck, if it was sold out, how's that not at least equal to the best you've ever done? Oh, well, we had a show there before. We raised prices. That was the first time Dutch had been to Booker. He said, hell, I didn't know you could raise the prices. We'll raise the fucking prices. Anyway, go ahead.
Now, for action received, I agree. Titan shows are overpriced, which is why I will no longer attend them. But they aren't higher priced than all the other promotions as you indicated. Your knocks against Hulk Hogan, I won't waste space on, because of how unimportant in reality wins and losses are. However, to my knowledge, Bob Backlund never pinned Hulk Hogan, and I'm certain Santana never pinned Hogan in WWF territory. And even if he did, those bouts took place 3 years ago, thus aren't valid in anyone's mind, except for the precious few wrestling historians.
So probably Norman is doing the old thing where, well, Hulk Hogan has been defeated by Bob Backlund and Tito Santana and this and that guy. And Dave's got to tell him, no, he hasn't. Norm probably knew he hasn't. Jack Pfeffer, where do you think his shit came from?
More interesting, he says it hasn't, and then he says, well, even if it did, no one would care except for the precious few wrestling historians. That's Dave putting down the historians.
Oh, God damn it.
Next, in the past, this is a quote from Norman, in the past, most top stars move freely back and forth between all the major organizations. End quote. Quit spewing the party line when it's a bunch of crock.
If somebody writes you, no wonder there was heat. If somebody writes you out of nowhere, some fucking college kid, quit spewing the party line in your magazine. What the fuck are you?
Once again, quit spewing the party line when it's a bunch of crock. They moved back and forth only
I thought a crock was the container.
They moved back and forth only.
If you can't have a bunch of containers, can you? You'd have to have a bunch of shit or a crock of shit, but the shit would be integral to be the stuff that's inside the container.
I think he's trying to say shit, but he went with crock. But anyway, the wrestlers moved back and forth only at the whim of their controlling promoter.
What?
Don't talk about all the freedom these wrestlers have.
He still didn't know how the business worked then, in terms of if guy fucking then gave his notice and left, he could do whatever the fuck he wanted with anybody that would hire him?
Don't talk about all the freedoms these wrestlers have, when in reality, they have little. And McMahon's competition actually gives them more options. In your Georgia section, you stated how, quote, through a corporate takeover and corporate decision, end quote, McMahon got control of Georgia Championship Wrestling Incorporated. Why don't you just say he bought the stock out from a majority of the shareholders and the courts ruled there was nothing illegal in the way he did it? Vince may have done some crooked and unscrupulous things, but as far as legality is concerned, that certainly wasn't one of them. A lot of it seems like semantics too, but let's continue here.
A lot of it seems like, how much free time did he have to, again, Norman Keitzer had nothing to do with any wrestling promotion, and he was operating a nice little magazine there, and he didn't want to hear any of this shit. He didn't give a shit.
The biggest complaint I have is your coverage of the Inoki Hogan bout from Japan.
Oh, here we go. Don't touch Japan.
First off, you left out several important details of the match, the 2 double countout endings. But even worse, you claimed that the bout was for the WWF title. You must have known full well, since you received the same reports from Japan as I do, that this was billed as for the IWGP title. I realize your magazine apparently has a very personal grudge against Hogan, for reasons I don't know. But this pathetic attempt to downplay his WWF title using non-factual material really bothered me.
Do you think that it may have been that since Hulk Hogan was the WWF champion and they had pictures of him and Inoki in Japan, that since nobody in the goddamn United States of America had ever heard of the IWGP title, they just, oh, here's Hogan defending his title. Because it was fucking wrestling.
Well, see, that's the thing, too, and I have to go back and check, because I have everything. I have the finished copies and all the content, the contents of everything that made up the copy. But Koichi was sending all the photos and the reports, and, you know, again, I don't know. Well, we do have Norman Keitzer's response to this, but I don't know exactly what would have caused this, but Dave was very upset, of course, as we...
Very upset, perturbed even.
I realize your magazine has a personal grudge against Hogan for reasons I don't know, but this pathetic attempt to downplay his WWF title using non-factual material really bothered me. Hey, I wasn't complimentary to Hogan covering the same match, being that his massive ego forced a ridiculously contrived ending, which damaged the promotion greatly. You then
Wait a minute. Wasn't that the fucking thing that everybody thought was a shoot where...
I think that was the year before, because this is 84. That was 83.
Okay, I'm sorry.
And by the way, 83, if you remember, it was a tournament, but technically the IWGP Championship is separate from the IWGP tournament. So in terms of what title he was talking about here, but anyway.
Yes.
You then say, quote, we are not sure where the claim originates, end quote, referring to Cobra's NWA Junior title. Well, Cobra's belt is the same one Les Thornton lost in Japan in 1982 to Tiger Mask. Does that refresh your memory?
God damn it. Does that... And I ask you again, Mr. Keitzer, and I remind you, you are under oath. Dave has been an insufferable fucking spectrum rider since even before I never saw this in his younger days, but I fortunately apparently didn't have to have these marathon letters written to me.
He liked your magazines. When Sayama retired, Cobra and Davey Boy Smith were placed in an elimination match and Cobra won. You also state, quote, in cities WWF is going head to head, the crowds have been fair to poor in most cases, end quote. Okay. There have been some major failures, And there will be more for reasons I've outlined a million times in The Observer. However, this area has been a major success. St. Louis is still generally doing better for WWF than NWA. In fact, even your beloved Twin Cities.
Even your beloved Twin City that you genuflect to.
Have shown the
Twin Cityite.
Have shown the WWF beating the AWA solidly 2 of 3 times. It was 2 out of 3 falls, and the WWF got it. The Miami crowds are nothing great, but are about what the NWA does weekly. The Atlanta debut drew better than 90% of the Georgia Championship Wrestling shows had in that city over the past year. If you were going to tab WWF road crowds as fair to poor, wouldn't it be responsible journalism to mention the home promotion is doing poorly or fairly as well? My last disagreement.
So he wants to freelance for this magazine and change their entire editorial policy and stance.
To his slant on things, and again, if you're listening to this, he had a hang on a lot, but not as much of a hang as he would in a few years after talking to a lot more wrestlers. So, let's finish this off though. My last disagreement is your suggestion that McMahon has a staff of more competent announcers than himself, and his ego makes him take center stage. Well, yes, his ego makes him take center stage, but what more competent announcer are you referring to? Monsoon is even more obnoxious on the air than Vince. Gene doing play-by-play is setting standards for incompetence, and the rest of the crew are thoroughly worthless. The only more competent announcer on Vince's staff than himself is an unnamed individual who...
What?
Hold on. Is an unnamed individual who he is keeping off the tube completely for that very reason.
Who was that?
The only more competent announcer on Vince's staff, so already working there in 84 than himself.
But now ring announcer would be Howard Finkel, but Finkel was always ring announcing.
But he's saying commentary, and he keeps him off TV because he's better than McMahon.
Not talking about Pat Patterson.
No, and he had been removed from commentary a year and a half earlier or so.
Well, boy, Dave leaves these teasers. I don't know who that might be at that time frame.
And by the way, we're going to end with his last little bit here, and we'll pick up. We'll do a part 3 next time with Norman Keitzer's response to this. My last question will be answered.
Did it begin with, "Hey, motherfucker"? Okay, go ahead.
My last question will be answered probably in your next issue. Will you try and create a federal case when reporting the results of the July 25th match when Jumbo Tsuruta beat Rick Martel via countout to keep a title, but not the AWA title? In fact, the whole match has been ignored by Gagne and his promotion here. And there was no interference in that match, nor 2 double countout endings prior to that. And he signs it, "About all."
What? That's about all.
Last time it was Yours in Wrestling. Now it's Yours in Wrestling, comma. Now it's About All, period. Dave Meltzer, San Jose, California. So again, I think in terms of communication skills and interpersonal skills and being able to take what you truly believe is the only way to see things, I guess what I'm trying to say is it doesn't seem too dissimilar than the way he behaves on Twitter right now.
Well, but he's been doing it since before he knew anything or should have thought that he knew any goddamn thing. Because now he's all inflated because he's been doing this for 40 years and he's talked to everybody and smoked everybody, whatever. But then he was telling this guy's been doing this for 20 years, doesn't give a shit about what he's saying. Oh, yeah, you got to do all this way. He's always been like that. Huh.
Again, noticeable is the ending. Yours in Wrestling versus About All.
About all.
That's about enough of you. It's about what I gotta think of you right now.
You're dismissed, and I will call for you when I need you again.
Well, like I said, next time on the Drive-Thru, Norm Keitzer's response from the files, Dave Meltzer, Volume 3.